Hello. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome.
Thank you.
And hi, Kino.
Hi.
How's everybody doing?
Pretty darn spiffy.
Good. Well, I want to welcome you, Jennifer, to Talking Back to Suicide. And you're coming to us from Alberta, right, where it's a sunny day. And I understand that you are an author of a series of books, right?
Yes.
And that you have utilized writing in your mental health journey to
Yes.
help you to express yourself and also to uplift yourself. So if you would like to share anywhere at the beginning, the middle, right now, whatever you'd like to say, we're all ears for you.
Yeah, so I guess I started writing because I needed an outlet. I was very introverted as a kid. I didn't have a lot of friends. I mean, understanding now that I have autism and ADHD kind of makes sense. But at the time, I didn't know, and I didn't really feel like I could talk to anybody, and I needed a way to sort out my feelings and my thoughts. And I started writing as a way, sort of that outlet to kind of organize my thoughts and kind of live vicariously through my characters, exploring my emotional growth and such through them. But then it just sort of it became more. It became, this is my hobby, this is my passion, and it just kind of grew from there. But it's always, I've come down to, this has been my self-care, my escape from reality, my way to deal with the stressors. I can take out my anger on a character that's fictitious and stuff, and it came. I jokingly said it satisfied my God complex.
How young were you when you started to express yourself through writing?
I started early. I think I was doing a few poems and such when I was 10, but I really took off when I was 12. My mom bought me a typewriter at the time, and it was just sort of that media that I needed to go forward. I was born before internets and before computers, and so I didn't really have a computer until I was in my 20s. But typewriter was where I started.
Do you remember what you first wrote when you were 12?
Oh yeah, it was a page. The first thing that I ever wrote on that typewriter was just a one-page description of a horse running and describing the smells, the sights, the sounds, what it looked like, how it moved. And I think I came away from that, oh my goodness, I can create a picture with words and it feels real. And that was kind of that spark that got me going.
Did you share that with anyone?
I shared it with my mom, but I didn't really want to share my writing with anybody. I mean, there was some school projects and stuff, obviously, that I would have to write. And I had a teacher that published one of my poems that I wrote in a teacher magazine. She had to ask permission. I don't know which one it's in because I really didn't remember a whole lot of that time when I was that little.
And you said you were introverted as a child. Could you say more about that and what you mean by introverted and how that impacted you?
Yeah. So not knowing at the time that I had autism and ADHD, I didn't know how to talk to people. I felt like everybody had this script that I had missed. And, maybe I was an alien dropped off on this planet. My parents were going to come and pick me up one day and say, oh, there's a big mistake. But I couldn't understand how people can just talk and interact and how to start conversations. And I had to force myself to make eye contact because it felt uncomfortable. And I remember I did to learn how to talk to people. I started making notebooks. I go, okay, so and so said this. Oh, this was the reply. Oh, there was a smile and a high five. That must be what I need to say when somebody says this. So I started out early on writing. And that was just how I was able to record life. I was very much a people watcher. And I was, just because I came off as awkward, I didn't understand those social cues. And I stuck out like a sore thumb.
Did your teachers speak to you about that, or speak to your mom and dad about?
No, it wasn't, unless you were disruptive to class or you had learning difficulties, just things like that didn't get pointed out or noticed. I never had trouble in school academically, and I was very polite and kept it all together, and then just came home. And my sons also are on the spectrum. They come home and they just explode and like hours long meltdowns and stuff. Instead of having hour-long meltdown, I would dive into my writing and I would just pour myself into the writing.
So, how did it come about that you eventually had I guess, an evaluation and a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder?
Yeah, that came when my son was diagnosed. Well, both of my boys, but my oldest was diagnosed first. And I remember people saying that I had two very busy boys, but it wasn't until they started preschool, because I didn't know otherwise. When they started preschool, my oldest had a hard time communicating with the other kids. He could care less, about playing with the other kids. He was very social with adults, but there was just some emotional dysregulation. And then I remember somebody saying that there was red flags, and the teachers at the preschool actually pointed it out to me. And I'm like, yeah, he's been doing that his whole life. And they're like, well, other kids don't do that. So we had him assessed. We had a psychologist come in. They looked at him, assessed his behavior, said, yeah, we need to do an ADOS assessment on him. And so I don't know if you know much about the ADOS assessment, but they go into a lot of detail about like when did he meet milestones, and it's very in depth about his growth and his development in all of the different categories of the spectrum. And I was looking at those thinking, yeah, those are normal. I've done those my whole life. Like, it's not a big deal, Yes, he goes to bed with a spatula. That's the toy of the week he's obsessing about. No, he's never learned to play with toys, and doesn't know how to talk to kids. But I didn't either, And so when they were saying, "Oh, these are signs," and I was like, "Oh, well, I've been doing those my whole life. Maybe there's something." And so 3 months after his diagnosis, I was diagnosed. I went through the same, I guess it was, they had to modify it because it's not meant for adults. But I went through the ADOS assessment as well and found out that I'm also on the spectrum, and with ADHD. And then the following year, my youngest was also diagnosed.
And what was that like to receive that diagnosis?
It was a shock to begin with, because it's like, oh my goodness, what does this mean? But then, before the diagnosis and then right after the diagnosis, it doesn't change who I am. And I've never tried to look at it as necessarily a disability. There are some things that just don't come naturally. Like, I had to teach myself a script in order to be able to talk to people. I had to teach my son a script, in order, because he would just literally walk up to kids in the park and just like stand right there in front of their face. Like, I want an interaction to happen. I just don't know how to start it. Or stand between two kids that are talking. You just stand right between them. It's like, they have to see me, So we had to develop a script, and I had to teach these things that would have come naturally to other kids. So I did that myself before it was more widely recognized what autism was, especially in girls. It's a lot harder to tell in women.
And in what ways is it harder to tell? What's the difference
I
that
think
you've seen?
women tend to mask it a lot more. We tend to kind of look around us and mimic what other people are doing. It doesn't mean that we understand what we're doing. It's just that we're hiding it.
And although it may be that, and of course, you're the expert on you, right? It may be that that script has become more natural for you, right? But do you feel in some way that that script is happening right now in the interaction that you're having with us?
Yes, there's a lot of things that I've got like a preset thing that I will go off of in my head. I feel like I've learned enough as I get older and have more social interactions. I've forced myself out of my shell, that I'm becoming a little bit more comfortable speaking with people. But that doesn't mean that after every conversation, I don't spend hours analyzing every single thing that I've said, wondering, what did they mean? I can't read between the lines. And I've gone through my whole life assuming everybody's annoyed with me, because I can't tell otherwise. And it's safer in my mind to assume people are annoyed than to not know they're annoyed and have them actually be annoyed. So it's caused a lot of stress. That social interactions do cause a lot of stress.
Now, sadly, kids can be very mean, right? Bullying, ostracizing, not including, saying mean words,
Yes.
to other kids. Do you feel that played a role? that social awkward, behavior, right? Or not knowing how to fit in because of the autism, right?
Oh yeah.
Did that play a role in terms of how others treated you? And again, it's not your responsibility, it's the other person's responsibility to be a kind person. But what do you think?
Absolutely. I was horribly bullied growing up and I could not understand why. And I kept thinking that I must be doing something because other people aren't being bullied like this. But I think all it was looking back is that I was a little awkward in certain situations. Some of the things I'd say didn't quite fit the conversations, or I had like stimming behaviors, like, and I tap my fingers or I sway. Just, it was relaxing to me in a stressful environment, but other people notice that and they think, oh, that looks weird. That kid is weird. I'm going to pick on that. Not everybody picked on me, but the ones that did made it worth their while, and definitely made me more withdrawn and, less likely to experiment socially with trying to reach out to people.
And you also mentioned being diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, I recall from my days as a practicing child psychiatrist that ADHD is the umbrella term, and a person does not necessarily have to have the hyperactivity part to have ADHD. It can be ADHD inattentive type.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what symptoms were you having, and at what age were you diagnosed, and what treatment was offered?
Okay. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 39. And once I was diagnosed, I'd struggled my entire life with impulsiveness. I have the hyperactivity as well as the attention, which is weird because I can also hyper focus. In my mind, it was seeming weird. Like if it was my writing, I could hyper focus and sit there for 12 hours and not work. A tornado could swing through our house and I wouldn't have any clue if I'm going to hyper focus. But trying to focus on something that is uninteresting to me was impossible. So I had that. But then the hyperactivity, I had a hard time sitting still. I had 4 younger brothers growing up. So, I think it was just chalked up to, oh, she's in a very very active environment. I lived on a farm, so we did a lot of physical work. So there was those outlets to kind of vent some of that. But in school settings, I had a hard time sitting still. And I used to hook my feet around the chair so that I could swing my feet all the time. And I would doodle so that I was doing something with my hands. It didn't mean I wasn't listening, but I'd doodle. I come up with my own strategies.
And did teachers notice that there was something not okay?
They noticed that I got picked on a lot. They noticed I didn't have any friends. They noticed that I was very quiet, and they'd make comments to that effect. But like I said, there was not much known about it at that time, unless you were disruptive to class or you had trouble with your schooling. And then you kind of just got, you slip between the grades, they just passed you on to the next grade. And then nobody in school ever knew because I hid it really well. I spent a lot of time studying other people and trying to emulate what they were doing.
Do you feel in any way it was emotionally exhausting?
Absolutely. Every day was emotionally exhausting. I wish I felt like I wasn't normal. I felt like there was something wrong with me because I couldn't understand the world. And that's why I spent so much time watching everybody and making notes on things and, reminiscing. The only place that was safe for me was in my own head.
And did that contribute in some way to feeling unhappy, depressed, having suicidal thoughts?
Absolutely. I was 12 the first time I thought about suicide. That was when I started writing. It was right before I started writing really hardcore and diving into that. That was my therapy. That was my safe place and saved me from all of this. My parents were splitting up at the same time. I was in a new school. I was getting horribly picked on. And it's like picked on enough they had to call the police a couple times. But yeah, that was the first time I thought about suicide. And I just thought, I can't do this. I can't do this forever. And then I shifted my thoughts and I was like, no, I can't say that. I can't say that because then that means they win. And I'm smarter than that. And so I was having this conversation in my head over a lunch period. I remember it very vividly that there has to be more than this. wait, like when I grow up, things are going to be different. And they were. But at that time, that was my saving. That was how I remember this conversation very, very vividly.
Where do you think that strength came from? And thank God for that strength. But
I've always been very analytical. I'm always thinking of things from several different angles. That's why I say I've got a what if brain. And I think I think that might be a big part of what saved me, is that I wasn't just looking at one small thing that, things suck and I can't do this anymore. I started looking at it from, okay, let's look at it from this angle and this angle and this angle. And, started looking at it from every different angle because I'd practiced that my entire life.
were you able to share your thoughts with your parents?
My mom was a single mom with 5 kids. There wasn't a whole lot of opportunities to share. And so I didn't really know how to express how I was feeling because I didn't know the term depression. I just thought, well, she's just going to say I'm feeling sorry for myself. But I thought it was more than that, but I didn't know. So I just didn't talk to her.
Were you having, Jennifer, thoughts like, I wish I were dead? Did it go into, I want to kill myself?
Yeah, well, it was, I wanted to end myself. Yes. I didn't think I could continue living like that at the time. And, it reappeared when I was about 16 again, when I was going through that, that teenagerhood and stuff. And I was getting, again, bullied. My mom was working 2 jobs, going to school, trying to support us. And I remember my grandma saying something too at the time that I said I was stressed because it was in the middle of midterms, like the final exams and stuff like that. And my grandma came to visit to watch us while my mom was working. And I mentioned something about being stressed because I was also working a part-time job at the weekends. And my grandma says, look at all the things your mom has to do. You don't have a right to be stressed. And I took that to heart and thinking, okay, then there must be something wrong with me. And because that was that time that I had also, the suicide thoughts kind of reared again. And so I was like, well, I don't have the right to think that. So that, I just dove deeper into my writing at that point, and that has always been my constant to escape and sort things out.
Do your characters have similar conflicts?
I do have a lot of my characters will have mental health issues. Writing in one, because I write a series, and I got to my 3rd book and I started writing it, and I stopped and realized I was like, my character has post-traumatic stress, and I'm writing all those symptoms of post-traumatic stress without even realizing it. And I'm like, it totally makes sense based on what's going on. But I do write a lot of my understanding of mental health into my characters.
I'm just thinking in terms of the trajectory of your life. So there you are, 16, right?
Mhm.
Again, having those thoughts, right?
Yep.
It sounds like maybe a combination of what was going on internally with you and having the ADHD, the autism, being bullied, external stressors in the family, right? Your mom's working, you're not being validated for how you're feeling.
Yeah.
And then you were in your nearly 40 years old when you were actually diagnosed.
Yeah.
Right. What sustained you during 16 to 39?
I'm not sure if it was any one thing. I think it was a combination of things. I became a mom. I enjoyed learning. I went into X-ray, so I worked. I spent a lot of time working so that I didn't have to deal with things. I did make a friend in high school that I was invited into a friend group. I think she and her friends were just as crazy as me. So it was kind of I was so depressed at that time, but then I had friends and I felt a little bit happier at that time. But yeah, I just dove into learning, and I figured, I can't control everything in life. I can't control what other people do, what other people say, but I will try to figure it out and try to understand why and control my reactions. And I loved learning, so I just dove into learning and creativity.
Bravo to you and bravo to your creativity. right? In terms of your family, did your father play a role in your upbringing?
I haven't seen my father since I was 11, so he was absent for most of my life.
And in thinking about having been diagnosed with the autism, do you think your mom or your dad or other relatives displayed some symptoms of that too?
Oh, absolutely. I have my one brother at the very least who has the hyperactivity and attention deficit. He was just never diagnosed. My mom managed it with discipline and but I've got another brother who he struggled with school, but then we found out at the end that he's gifted in spatial ability and design. But he used to do some things too that were a little bit weird, and like stimming things and seeing things differently like I do. And then now his son is being tested for autism as well.
And when you received that diagnosis at 39, did you immediately share it with your family?
I did. I shared it with my mom,
What
and
was her reaction?
she's like, "Oh, you don't have autism. You don't have ADHD." But she didn't believe it when I told her my sons did too. And it took a while because she kept saying things like, and I know it's not a thing anymore, but she's like, "Oh, you were always so smart, and your kids make good eye contact, and they're very friendly, and they play." And she's like, if your kids were on the spectrum, they wouldn't play. And that she didn't believe it for the longest time. And then I don't know where the shift happened, but she started kind of accept it. Maybe it was because I was, researching and learning a bit more about it and kind of talking to her about it, or maybe she just saw it with my kids as they started to grow up and she started to see those signs that they weren't quite, meeting those milestones where
No, join in.
they could.
Yeah, Jennifer, I mean, let's look at how bullying has evolved, you
Mhm.
know, years over the generations. When we were all in school, at different periods, even though if you were bullied, it was a traumatic experience, but it'll just happen there, it'll stay there.
Yeah.
Now, as the generations have evolved, if you get bullied at school, now it goes to social media and then it never stops. It just
Yes.
continues and continues, which is why the Gen Zs, especially, are so emotional living in this era. They can't handle it. They can't handle it the way you did. You found a creative outlet. You managed to get that internal strength, from somewhere. And of course, we eliminate all the distractions that we have in this day and age. And you worked through it. You found a creative outlet. These days, when someone gets bullied or a teen gets bullied in school, there is no creative outlet. They don't even think about that first, because next
Mhm.
thing you know, getting bullied on social media or someone is just commenting on social media for what happened at school today. And then you become the laughing stock of the school or even of the whole entire area. So you're dealing with so much more stress as a teen, So I guess I'm just going to get to the bottom line, based on, your life story. Like, how do we fix what's going on in the world today, from your personal opinion? Say someone in school right now, let me not label it to a demographic, anyone now who's going through what you went through and is on the verge of, committing suicide because they don't know. They're also asking the same questions of what does it mean, like I don't belong, with
Mhm.
all the cool things, it gets to you. So what would you say, we can change globally as a society, to fix this?
I think that, well, my school where my kids go, it's very good. They don't allow bullying to go unchallenged. Whereas in my day when I was in school, it's like, oh, kids will be kids, and then they just sort of shrugged it off. But you're right. When I was a kid, it was a lot more physical, like being shoved in lockers, having basketballs thrown at your head. It was a lot more physical. Nowadays, it's a lot more, widespread. And if it had been a lot more widespread, it would have been harder to escape. But I think teaching kids that everybody has differences and trying to accept those differences instead of focusing on them. I think that that will that will allow people to be a little bit more empathetic and open and understanding. um, I tell my kids too, and I don't know how they teach it in school, but I do tell my kids that you can't control what other people do. All you can control is what you do. And just having a safe place for them to go too. Like if they don't have a safe family, they should have safe persons, safe people that they can talk to. And talking it's a big, powerful tool. I was so confused because I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't feel like I had anybody to talk to. But if I talked to myself basically. But if I hadn't had that, if I'd had somebody to talk to, it would have probably been a lot easier.
Yeah. And do you think we should involve, our local communities if the school is not doing a good enough job?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, well, they say it takes a village to raise a child, and I mean, like we're all living in our own little tiny separate little villages in each one of our houses and stuff. We're very isolated, and the only connection we have with the world a lot of times is through social media. And if social media is telling you, that's the only connection you have with the world, and you've got people there saying that, saying bad things about you and stuff, it's going to affect your self-esteem. And you're going to think that the entire world thinks that way, which is not true. It's a small group, but they make it seem like it's a big thing.
Okay. So let's just say, for example, now I am a 15-year-old kid, I'm in school and I don't have a supportive family. I go to a government school, which is no good. I don't know how it is in Canada, the US, but South Africa is good. There's no support there. People laugh at me. There's something happening with me. I don't know what it is. I can't even afford to go find out what it is. What can I do for myself without the school, without the community, without the doctors? Like, what could be a starting point for me? I'm sitting at home and there's nowhere to turn to. What can I do for myself?
Yeah. I started to analyze my life and look at, okay, instead of looking at those things that I don't like or those things that I do poorly, I started to try to focus on those things that I did well. I started karate around the same time. And, there's always something that, like maybe I'm, get bad grades on tests, but at that same time, I'm doing really well in this area. And then maybe I'm doing poorly in this area, but I'm doing really well in this area. Just focusing on, instead of focusing on the negatives and that's all we see. Let's, it's good to try to focus on those things you can do well and take pride in them and dive into them, embrace them. That I'm not a bad person. I do that with my kids when they start, they do this like spiraling emotional vortex of negative thinking. Oh, I have no friends. I can't do anything. Yes, you do. You just got invited to a birthday party, a couple weeks ago. If you didn't have friends, you wouldn't be going to a birthday party. And, oh, I can't do well in school. What are you talking about? You just got 10 out of 10 on your spelling test. So obviously you can do well, and just challenging those negative thoughts because they're always going to rear their ugly heads. But for every negative thoughts, you can replace it with a positive,
Takes the same energy.
It takes a lot of energy, yes, but it's worth it,
It's good to notice the wins, even as adults. It's good to notice the wins. We're so concentrated bulk of the time, and I think this is how, it's all built up there, so how the brain actually operates. It always thinks on what's not working in my life, what's not working in my business, and I'm thinking of, the books are not getting sold. But then you also have to write on those wins each day.
Yes. Yeah. Think about the wins and look at those negatives as, okay, this is a negative. How can I change it? Maybe you can't, I mean, I can't like you mentioned book sales. I can't like twist people's arms and say, go buy my book. But what I can do is I can say, you know what? I'm very creative. I'm going to keep writing because it's my passion and I love it. And I'm going to keep writing whether people buy my books or not. It's who I am. And this brings me joy.
Yeah. Well, those are the solutions.
Jennifer, you're such a strong advocate. Really, such a clear, inspirational, authentic voice, right? Have you advocated around autism?
I've tried. I don't have the education to go into those fields that would really, I could be able to work with people and stuff. But I haven't made it a secret that I have autism and ADHD. And I found that once I did, not only did, like I'm giving myself permission to ask questions about things if I don't understand something. Like I have a hard time with like sarcasm and jokes. So it's very liberating in that I can explain to people. It's like, okay, if I'm saying something if I'm asking these questions, it's not because I'm dumb or anything. It's because I don't know. I'm also, I find that a lot of people will say, "Hey, my kids do this. What did your kids do?" Or I feel like this in situations, and how did you deal with things and stuff? So I get a lot of people messaging me, it's great. It makes me feel like I'm not alone, which is amazing because I grew up so for so many years I felt very alone and stuff. But I've tried to approach it with the idea, like I said, there's nothing wrong with having an autistic brain. You just don't learn those things that come natural. It doesn't mean you can't learn them. It just takes a little longer. And I do remember going to a parent class with other parents who just found out that their kids have autism and that they're on the spectrum. And at that time, I had found that I was also on the spectrum with ADHD and autism. And I'm looking at all these parents, and they're asking questions about, like, well, what is my kid's future? It's like, are they going to be able to get married? Are they going to be able to have a job? And they're just like, they're so depressed. There was this dark cloud of dread over them. And I had to speak up and say, hey, look, I just found out that I have autism. I had it all my life. I got married. I've had a job. I've been creative. I have kids and a family. I said, it's not the end of the world. It's just going to take time and extra learning.
A prior guest of ours on the podcast is Frank King, who has a mental health history, and he's a comedian, and he combined that in terms of mental health advocacy, and he shared on our show a book that he had read. The author is, I think her name is Judy Carter, and the book is titled "The Message of You." Yeah. And I'm in the process of listening to that book on Audible, and you might be interested in it because it's talking about one's life experience, right? And we all have our abilities and our bona fide, I'm an expert on this, right? Because sometimes potentially we hold ourselves back because, well, who am I to speak? You might be interested in that book.
Yeah, I can check it out.
Yeah, because I think that there's so much that you're bringing to the world that I really think needs to be shared, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd like to ask you a question about being diagnosed with the ADHD. Was there treatment recommended?
Yes, because I tried to manage it without, success for many, many years. I was recommended medication, and I thought about it, hummed and hawed about it. I tried the medication, and I'm not saying everybody should because everybody's unique and individual, but I found that it was night and day for me. I went from a jumbled mess to all of a sudden I can organize my thoughts. And I was like, wow, is this how everybody else functions? I should have done this years ago. My husband noticed I wasn't speeding as much.
I missed the last word you said. Your husband noticed you weren't.
My husband noticed that I wasn't speeding as much when I was driving. My gas consumption went down. I wasn't talking nearly as fast. I wasn't losing my keys or my cell phone as much. So, it's like he noticed these huge changes. I noticed inside my head, I noticed my thinking changed immediately.
Were you taking a daily medication?
I was taking something for anxiety before that. But then, that was just treating a symptom. And it's a valid symptom. But the ADHD, it didn't necessarily help with the anxiety, but it helped me to sort and organize my thoughts, which was huge in daily functioning of life.
And did you mention earlier on that you had worked in X-ray?
I did. I worked as an X-ray technologist for about 10 years.
Wow. In a hospital setting or outpatient?
Yeah, hospital and clinic. I used to do OR. I trained in CT, mammography. I loved emergency. I did a lot of that. And then I worked into clinic. I was going to train for ultrasound, but I got pregnant and had kids, and I thought, maybe I'll focus on family.
And did you find that I guess at that point it was not recognized as autism and ADHD. But did that impact your ability to work in those settings?
And there was it was hard for me to maintain an emotional distance, seeing patients, like people coming in from emergencies, and I mean the blood and like broken bones, that didn't bother me because I was very scientific. I was like, okay, I know how this is sitting, I know what I need to do, and I had a list of things in my head step by step, and I do them, so that wasn't a problem. It was hard to maintain the emotional distance when my patients are suffering, and not getting involved. But also to the socialization with other coworkers, I was the misfit. I was the one that said, like I said awkward things, and I'd come in, I'd be in the room, and everybody's like, oh, they're talking back and forth, and I think I'm adding something to the conversation, and then all of a sudden silence and crickets. It's just like, I'm like, what did I say? Like, and it's just kind of haunting as far as the social awkwardness that followed me through life. And now I understand it. Now I know there wasn't anything really, there was a reason for it. I wasn't just broken. I felt like I was broken for the longest time, but now I'm like, okay, I understand it. It's just, I didn't understand those situations and stuff. And there's a reason for it. And yeah.
In terms of your marriage, right, and your husband, does your husband have autism, ASD type symptoms as well?
He's never been diagnosed. I would be very surprised if he doesn't have ADHD because he shows a lot of the symptoms that I do. But he's never been diagnosed, and he's managed through life without any desire to be diagnosed with anything. I think that, seeing that both of our kids now have autism and ADHD, he's thinking maybe he should get tested. And he says it, he's a sweetheart. He says, so that I don't feel like I'm the only one who gave it to them.
And can you say, Jennifer, now in terms of your work life, is your work as an author, primary, or do you have another job too?
I babysit here and there, but I mostly just work on my writing at home.
And could you share about your books, their titles, where we can find them?
Yeah, you can see all my books on my website. It's jmshawauthor.com. It's a series, a magic fantasy. There's lots of action adventure, some supernatural and suspense kind of all woven in there and stuff. But all my books are listed on my website, and there's links to find them online. And my fourth book is coming out this Sunday.
Oh, congratulations. Great. What is the title? And say a little bit about what it's about.
Yeah, so the first one's The Ascension, the second is The Convergence, third one is The Fractured Veil, and the fourth one is Forsaken Souls. And there's our world, our time, coexisting magical realm, veil that separates us. We can't see or cross it because we don't have magic, but these creatures that do can and have. And they've been the source of inspiration for our myths and legends and fairy tales and such. And then my main character is a young man born with the ability to use magic. His name is Callum Walker, and he doesn't know why he's been given these gifts. He's trying to make the most of it, and he ends up being able to cross this veil because he has magic and enters this magical realm and meets all these creatures, and he becomes embroiled in what's going on there. And then we follow him through the series as he's trying to figure out who he is, where he fits in, because he's too magic for here, but too human for there, and then master these abilities to survive. And interestingly enough, I had a reader point out to me that his journey of figuring out where to belong and figuring out who he is and mastering his abilities kind of mimics my own adventures and journey with autism and ADHD and trying to figure out my place in the world and society.
What age group do you see your books primarily for?
So like a young adult and new adult, so like teens and 20s. I've had everybody go from my 8-year-old up to octogenarian. Even though that's my target audience, most of my readerships are women around my age.
It just sounds wonderful, really. Yeah. I want to shift back to the autism and mental health. Mm-hmm. To your understanding, right? Do you think that those that have been diagnosed on the spectrum, or those that might have, autism, but they don't know that yet. Do you think that they're at risk for suicidal thinking or possibly suicide?
Absolutely. It's very disconcerting to go through your entire life and think that, there's something wrong with you, but you don't know what. For me, it was very liberating to find out that, oh, that's what's going on. And it was very, encouraging. And I did a lot of soul searching and looking back at my life and realizing the signs were all there. And that's why I felt it. And I no longer feel that way. But if you feel like you don't belong, it's huge. You feel alone, you feel sad, you feel broken. And if you feel those strongly enough and you don't see any escape or any way out of it, then absolutely you're at risk for suicide.
And what advice would you have for someone who might be contemplating that?
Speak to somebody. There's always, it's get another perspective on your life if you have to. Sometimes you see things through a funnel. You're just seeing things like, with blinders on, and you can't see the bigger picture. And if you're just looking like this, like you're not thinking straight, you need to have somebody else who can see the other things in your life that you maybe don't see.
When you were sharing earlier about sort of the black and white, negative thinking, or a person starts to just remember all the terrible things that are happening, and they are happening, but then they forget about the positive things. I had an image in my head of almost like a seesaw, right? But also sort of draw a horizontal line between the seesaw seats, and then make it a triangle, right? And the peak of the triangle is above it, right? And in a way, the peak of the triangle is that you're looking down, not in a perspective way, right? Not a negative way. You're gazing down and being able to create balance. And also maybe even beyond the balance part, it's having an entirely new perspective, like a synthesis of those thoughts.
Yes.
Like I'm all of this, and I have potential for so much more positive, right?
Yeah.
So it sort of goes also with what you just were sharing.
And I've told my kids, I like, to learn and teach in stories and parables and, little quotes and stuff that kind of make you think and stuff. And I've told my kids, because they get really distressed when they can't do something right or they make mistakes and stuff, and they just dwell on those. And I've tried to tell them, like, hoping I'm getting through to them, is that, you're not going to be good at everything. And if you were, what's the point of trying anything? I was going somewhere with this, and thoughts just disappeared out of my head. You can't be good at everything. You just have to, and then you don't focus on the bad things and stuff. You just let them, it'll ruin your life. Your thoughts can be influenced by what your feelings can be influenced by what you're thinking about, which is why I don't watch horror movies at night, because then I have nightmares and stuff. But if you surround yourself with good people and you focus on the good things in your life, the bad things don't seem quite as bad. It's hard though, because you look at the news and you see a whole bunch of bad stuff. They just hyper focus on these things, and they repeat them and repeat them and repeat them. Tiny bit of good stuff on the news, and that's what we feel like in our life. It's just that there's a lot of good stuff out there. It's just not as entertaining and not talked about and stuff. So that's what we need to try to focus on and highlight those.
I'm a visual thinker. Yeah. And as you were talking, I was thinking, here we are driving through life, right? Metaphorically speaking. But if you put it less of a metaphor, but made it reality, as an example, you're in the car, you're driving, but if our foot is always on the brake, meaning the negative thoughts, we're never getting anywhere.
Yes. Oh, I know what I was going to say too before, is that I learn a lot more from those things that I do wrong than the things that I do right.
Say more about that.
So that's what I've tried to tell my kids, is like, when they fail at something, it's a learning opportunity. I've tried to look at things differently as well. Like, I had a lot of test anxiety, and growing up. And my sons also have test anxiety. So when it says, oh, say it's time for a quiz, immediately you go like into panic mode and stuff. And I told my kids, I was like, I don't like that word test. I don't like that word quiz. I heard it said somewhere, I think it was on Reading Eggs Math Seeds. It was like an online learning program and stuff. Instead of saying it's quiz time or it's a test or something, they'd say, now show me your skills. It sounds a whole lot better. It's less scary. Just like the word marketing. Marketing is a terrifying word. I don't know what it means. So I don't say marketing. I say, show the world I exist, and just twist around. So it sounds a lot more friendly. And I try to do that. And you can, like when my son says he has no, or he doesn't, he can't do this. He will say things like, oh, I'm not smart. I'm not smart enough to do this. He's like, yes, you are smart enough. You just haven't learned it yet. So twist those words around,
Yes, the power of language, right? There's the magical word abracadabra.
Yeah.
And I learned that there's actually a meaning to those words. Abracadabra means I create as I speak, right? So the power of words and language, what is going on in our head is what we're able to put out into the world.
Yeah. I mean, out of context, it's the I think, therefore I am kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a huge brain-body connection. I mean, if you're thinking scary thoughts, your heart's going to beat faster and stuff. You're going to breathe faster. You're going to be tense. And there's no danger. It's just your thoughts that have created this physical response. So, I mean, if you don't focus on those, then you will be more relaxed and you won't have those physical sensations that can thus create a spiral, because you feel this way and then your thoughts become more dark, then you feel more dark and then your thoughts become darker and, and more stressful and stuff. So it's like a vicious cycle. But if you can break that cycle, and the best way to do that is just to talk it out, talk to somebody, get a perspective. Yeah.
And even as you were saying, and I take away the word even, and also to be creative, right? To color, to draw, to write a story, a poem.
And your spark of joy. Yeah.
And Kino, any more thoughts to add?
No, I think we covered it all. We got the solutions we came for.
Any last words that you would like to share with us and our audience today, Jennifer?
I can't think of anything specific to say other than thank you so much for listening. And I hope that somebody takes away something positive from what I've said and, realizes that even though you feel alone, it's very lonely to feel this way, you're not. There's how many billions of people in the world? I'm sure there's somebody else that feels exactly the same as you do. You just have to go out and find them.
And also adding to what you just said, who has felt the way you feel and learned the path through it, right? Yeah. Right, from the dark thoughts to the more enlightened thoughts as well, right? So we don't have to stay stuck. Right, there are friends out there, and knowledge is power. Right. So if there's a concern or something just doesn't seem okay, reach out to friends, right? Reach out to professionals, such as your primary care doctor, a therapist, an emergency room. Call 988 if you're having suicidal thoughts or in crisis. That we don't have to stay alone in our pain. We can figure out what is causing that pain and do something to help it.
And I mean, even if you don't have a phone or you don't know what number to call, you can go into a hospital and they can give you resources. You don't even have to you don't even have to stay at the hospital. You can just go into the triage nurse and say, hey, I'm thinking this way. I need to know what to call. They have the resources. You can go into a police station or a fire department. I'm sure they have, they have access to these phone numbers as well. And teachers, if you don't have if you don't have a grown-up at home you can talk to, you don't have friends, you can talk to a safe grown-up, like a teacher or principal. There's lots of people out there that if they don't have the answer, they can help you find it.
Thank you for adding that. And thank you so much, Jennifer. Really wonderful. So glad to have met you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been lovely. Thank you for having me on.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.